Aloha party people, you are listening to Inside the Desert Oasis Room, episode number 138. This episode is sponsored by Tandawai Rum, the world's largest rum producer and winner of over 170 international medals in the past 4 decades. Check out their webpage at tandawaiusa.com or follow them on Facebook or Instagram at tandawaiusa. This podcast is also sponsored by the Tonga Hut. With locations in both North Hollywood and Palm Springs, California, the Tonga Hut serves classic tiki cocktails in a classic tiki setting. Dine in a secret tiki hideaway or learn about rum and rum history at one of their educational seminars. And if you're up to the challenge, take the journey to join the Loyal Order of Drooling Bastards. For information on events, Rum Club, and more, go to tongahut.com or find them on Facebook or Instagram. This episode is sponsored by the Tiki Bar T-Shirt Club, where their monthly T-shirt designs pay tribute to a Polynesian bar or restaurant from days long past. Each design is available for a limited time and will never be produced again. For the collectors out there, be sure to check out their subscription program, where they offer a discounted 3, 6, or 12-month plan, or you can always buy shirts one at a time. For more information and to check out this month's shirt, visit tikibartshirtclub.com. Today we go into the Mai-Kai's main dining room to join Jim Hurricane Hayward and special guest Matt Pietrek for their Rums of the Mai-Kai Symposium direct from the Hukilau. Go on a virtual journey to the Caribbean to learn about the key rums and styles that have dominated the Mai-Kai's acclaimed cocktails for more than 60 years. As always, I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did bringing it to you. And if you did, hit that subscribe button. Subscribing makes it easier for you to follow our adventures. Shares on your social media pages are always appreciated. And if you'd like to help support the show, go to desertoasisroom.com to pick up some merch or make a donation. This podcast does not survive without the help of its sponsors or its listeners, so every purchase or donation, no matter the size, is totally appreciated and helps keep this podcast coming to you every week. Okay, here we go. Jim Hayward and Matt Pietrek with Rums of the Mai-Kai.
Desert Oasis Room.
Aloha and welcome to the Mai-Kai for the Sunday finale of the Hukilau 2019. I'm Hurricane Hayward. To my right, Matt Pietrek of the Cocktail Wonk blog, budding author and rum expert. He knows more about rum than I do, so that's why he's here.
I think he's being modest.
I might know a little more about the Mai-Kai.
I think he does.
We're actually here to talk about the rums and the Mai-Kai, so let's start with that. This is from the Mai-Kai's 1956 menu, and of course rum was always front and center on the Mai-Kai's menu, and I love this little blurb that was on their menu for years, and it pretty much explained the philosophy in a nutshell. At the Mai-Kai we have personally selected the finest of rums from our vast cellar. The mixtures are the results of long, steady, and careful testing of Mariano, our chief mixologist. Of course, that's Mariano Liquidine, their chief mixologist. Now, this kind of sets the stage for your night at the Mai-Kai. And this is kind of a typical of the early mid-century tiki menus to kind of set the mood. This, of course, was their 56 menu. Of course, rum didn't start at the Mai-Kai. It started with Don the Beachcomber, and in the tiki realm, that's where it all started. Don started his restaurant after Prohibition ended in Hollywood. He called it Don the Beachcomber, and he was so into it, he just changed his name. He said, oh, what the hell? I don't want to be called Ernest Raymond Beaumont Gann anymore. Can you blame him? He legally changed his name to Don E.R. Beach. And there you see Don on the left and his lovely bar on the right. It set the stage for everything. It's the reason we're here, basically. And of course, he was the cocktail pioneer. Don created a litany of great drinks. There he is on the left in his bar in the 1930s. And right there you see the glass. Is anyone drinking a deep sea diver right now? If you go to the bar right now, you can order a deep sea diver. It comes in that exact same glass, thanks to Beach Bum Berry and Cocktail Kingdom. On the right, there's the Don Beach drink description, the Pearl Diver. And you're going to notice a theme as we go through this. Don the Beachcomber drinks, Mai-Kai drinks. This is Don's menu from, I don't know when exactly this was, probably the 50s. It wasn't an old menu, but this is a great one because you can see all the drinks and how they relate to the Mai-Kai. You know, you have the rum julep, which is on the Mai-Kai menu, the Tahitian rum punch, which is the Tahitian breeze, Don's Pearl, which is the hidden pearl. Of course, the Pearl Diver we just mentioned. I could go through every one, but this is not a cocktail symposium. I've done this before. These are my favorites. These are the drinks you should be ordering, but they're all Don the Beachcomber originals that ended up on the Mai-Kai, slightly adjusted, not quite the same. Matt, how many Mai-Kai drinks have you had since you've been here so far?
I think 5, which is surprisingly low for me.
Is this your first visit?
Oh, no.
No.
Like 4th or 5th.
4th or 5th.
Yeah.
We met at the Rum Fest, like
Yes,
5 years ago?
About 5 years ago, just
Okay.
when I was getting started. I would just say that at latitude 29, the Pearl Diver would be the Pontchartrain Pearl Diver.
This is a kind of a lost tradition. Nowadays, all the tiki bars are great at coming up with their own cocktails. You don't see people like, I wouldn't say ripping each other off, but copying each other. But it was sort of standard practice back in the mid 50s. The Mai-Kai just did it better, and I think Don the Beachcomber even admitted that once. He said, "Oh, the Mai-Kai does it correctly." Now, Don was such a rum aficionado, more than anyone can imagine. This is his 1941 menu from both the Chicago and the Hollywood Don the Beachcombers, which at the time I believe are the only 2 locations in the world. Behind the bar at Don the Beachcomber, the nectar of the gods, that's what he calls rum, and I totally agree. I'm sure you would agree as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So I was hoping Matt could elaborate a little bit on Don's favorite rums here. It runs the gamut. He's got a little bit of everything. I don't know how clear this screen is from a distance, but Don covers all the rum styles of the Caribbean, basically. And I love this map of the Caribbean as well. So in the 1940s, 50s, Caribbean rums would have dominated the marketplace, correct?
Yeah. Absolutely. Basically by the 20s and 30s, the rum world was sort of in decline. Basically things like beet sugar and things like that had caused, in economic conditions, in fact, it's caused the decline of Caribbean rum in terms of like pricing and plantations closing and things like that had caused that to go into effect. Luckily, one of the things that brought it back was World War II, which in fact, British Navy, rum, lots of rum was lost to bombings. There was an upswing in demand for rum, and so basically after World War II, it was full steam ahead especially the British colonies.
So Don's background is kind of unique, and he got his background in rum in the 1930s, correct? And during Prohibition, apparently he was a rum runner, according to legend.
That's what I've heard. But I think you know that one better than I do.
And he did a lot of traveling in the Caribbean and visited many of these islands. And, if you believe his menu, he visited every island. We don't know for sure where he went, but he was obviously influenced by certain rums and various islands in the Caribbean.
Right. And I would say it's also interesting up there, if I'm reading it correctly, you'll see New England rum as well. That this was and that era before New England rum had sort of disappeared off the map. I think it was completely gone by the 1960s, but basically from about 1920 on, it was very little being made.
Yeah, Don did have New England rums on his original menu, and it's actually called out in some of the cocktails.
Right.
And I've had some people ask me, it's like, how do we make this Don Beach drink? What's New England rum?
Right.
So.
Yeah, and sort of interesting, some of the descriptions I've read of New England rum are that it was very pungent and almost, from what we've read, I've not had any of the old New England rum myself, but it was actually sort of in that same league as Jamaican rum, very, very pungent in that regard.
I have a secret to share. There's actually a bottle in the back. We might get to taste some.
Excellent. And it's actually very cool to see sort of New England rum, New England as a rum source sort of coming back these days with people like Maggie Campbell, Privateer.
But at this point in history, in the 30s, 40s, there was no U.S. no U.S. rum trade anymore. It was all Caribbean.
Correct.
So this is the fascinating document. I gleaned this from Beach Bum Berry's Potions of the Caribbean, as I've gleaned a lot of my information. This is that same menu, but you open that cool menu, and inside is the rums from Don the Beachcomber's cellar. And this is a huge amount of rums. And Don's credo, of course, what one rum can't do, 3 rums can. This is his entire collection at that time in his bars in Chicago and in Hollywood. And there's a lot of great rums on here. And as I point out here, 20 of these rums, at least on this list, I've traced to the early days of the Mai-Kai in the 1950s and 60s.
Right. And it's also something that sort of a couple of things jump out at me here. Barbados rum up there. It was not until the 1930s or so that in Prohibition that Barbados began exporting any rum in any substantial quantity. Prior to that, most of the sugar was going into. They were focusing on making sugar, and it was basically the Prohibition providing opportunity for rum runners. You see that story with like Bill McCoy, the real McCoy rum today. But essentially, Barbados rum, as we know it today, is really only dates from basically the 1930s and 1940s. They were making rum and consuming it locally, but in terms of like export rum in the same way as Jamaica or Demerara was still relatively new when this menu was printed.
And 2 of these Barbados rums here, Lightbournes and Cockade, are in the back bar at the Mai-Kai.
Yes. And also interesting, to go back just a moment there, the Martinique rum there, today we associate Martinique with agricole style rum made from cane juice that has its own sort of very unique flavor profile. But the transition from basically from traditional molasses style rum to the cane juice rum we have today didn't really start until the 1870s or so. Basically the sugar market had collapsed, and the Martinique and Guadeloupe in particular had discovered that it was economically more beneficial to basically make rum from sugarcane juice rather than to extract out the sugar and make rum from the molasses. And that process of switching over from molasses-based rum economy to a sugar-based or a sugarcane juice rum economy basically took almost the next century. So by 1960, there was really only one molasses-based rum distillery operating, and today there still is one molasses-based rum distillery in Martinique. So it's hard to know without actually going tasting these bottles, these Martinique rums of 1941, what exactly they were.
And this is a whole separate discussion, but there's a lot of theories about the original Mai-Tai and how it was most likely not an agricole rum that Trader Vic used. It was most likely a molasses-based.
Apparently there's some disagreement between Martin Cate and Jeff Berry as to what it was. Martin being on the side of it being a rum grande rome, which is a Martinique molasses-based sort of competitor to those very high ester Jamaican rums. And you'll actually see in the Denizen Merchants Reserve, which is a rum for sale today, that trying to replicate the mix of the Mai-Tai rum mix after they had basically ran out of Ray and Nephew 17 and then running out of Ray and Nephew 15, that the mix they came up with, or the mix they used, and that Martin Cate worked with Denizen to try to replicate, actually uses this rum grande rome, a very, very pungent, very high ester. I actually have a sample of it at home, and I will say it will compete with any sort of high ester, super funky Jamaican rum.
A couple other quick things about this document before we move on. There's obviously a lot of Cuban rum here. This is the Cuban rum heyday, and you see, at least at my count, 4 of these at least made it onto the Mai-Kai menus. And a rare one there, Sloppy Joe's rum.
Yes, and by this point in history, like 1941, Cuba had mostly transitioned all the way to column stills, pot stills that were sort of going the way of the dodo in Cuba, and we were sort of transitioning to the modern Cuban style, very column still, like lighter rums that get a lot of their rum, their flavor from oxidative aging rather than extractive aging.
Also of note on this, of course, a lot of lemon heart, the same lemon heart we know today. This is the heyday of lemon heart as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and in some of the research I've been doing on lemon heart, the brand itself disappeared in England from about 1875 through 1935 or so, but when it came back, when sort of lemon heart was relaunched as a brand, like the way we know it today, lemon heart was the first lemon heart. The only thing that we saw advertised, at least, was lemon heart Jamaican, and it wasn't until another decade or so that we started seeing lemon heart Demerara as sort of like the big player here.
And Don's got both. He's got the Jamaicans and the Demeraras. And speaking of Jamaicans, J. Ray Nephew Dagger, which many of you may know as a legendary rum. Happen to have an old bottle here. I have to give it back, unfortunately. Yeah. Speaking of Dagger, here's some old vintage advertising of Dagger. We had various versions of the Dagger aged at different levels, and the Dagger Punch, which is used in a lot of cocktails. I believe Stephen Remsburg waxed poetically yesterday about visiting Don the Beachcombers and drinking the dark rum drinks and just loving that taste, and it had to have been that Dagger rum, the original 97 proof, right?
Right. Yeah.
There's the Lemon Heart, some old vintage ads from Lemon Heart. As we said, there's the Jamaican and the Demerara.
Yeah, no, it's sort of interesting. I have a lemon heart, a similar lemon heart ad and presentation I've given, where there was a very brief period where there was a lemon heart navy rum for about 2 years, and it kind of disappeared. But during that era, it was like the London Dock rum style sort of being rebranded as navy rum. And so it's sort of an interesting transition as rum brands are evolving and trying to figure out like how do they penetrate the market.
And a shout out to Lemon Heart as a sponsor of the Hukilau, and they have been using their rum in cocktails all weekend. And of course, the Mai-Kai still uses Lemon Heart 151, and you can taste it in a lot of the cocktails here as well. We'll get to more of that. Here we go. Now we're getting up to speed with the Mai-Kai. Tiki in the tropics, 1956. The Thornton brothers came south from Chicago. Of course, they were regulars at Don the Beachcomber. No surprise. They learned everything they could learn visiting the tropical bars that they used to frequent. Young hotshots, they decided to open their own place. They came to Fort Lauderdale, where we're standing right now. And you can see the construction photo on the left. This is a newspaper clipping from the opening day, the very next day, December 28th, 1956. So this is a December 29th article. Here's some other great shots. I'm sure I need to give a shout out to Swanky. This was in Tim's book, which you can get in the gift shop, signed by Mr. Gleisner. We have a great photo of the front area. Back in the early days, there was the US 1 was not a 4-lane highway. You had this nice frontage that kind of disappeared over the years. Great artist rendering. The Mai-Kai just set such a scene, such an enveloping atmosphere, as we all know. It just made the experience so much better. It made the drinks and the food and the whole experience just a united experience of Polynesian paradise. When they came to time to do a cocktail program, the Thornton brothers, that's Bob on the left and Jack on the right, they went to Don the Beachcombers and kind of pilfered his guys, basically. They took, instead of taking the number 1 guys, they took the number 2 guys. And that's Mariano in the middle. He was their number 2 bartender. He started with Don back in 1939 in Hollywood. He moved to Chicago in 1940. By 56, he knew everything he needed to know about making Don the Beachcomber cocktails. And that's Don's bar in Chicago on the left. So he was happy to move on and be the leader of the cocktail program. And he was given unprecedented power as a mixologist in those days. The guys at Don's, worked in the back. Nobody knew who they were. They never really did any press or public relations. They were the unsung heroes, as they still are. But Mariano was given star status along with the chef who came from Don's. This is the 56-57 menu they created upon opening. Looks a lot like that Don the Beachcomber menu. A lot of the same drinks. And the menu is pretty much, a copy of Don's. 33 of these drinks were from, actually 43 of the 44 drinks, I believe, were from Don's. The Black Magic was the only original. 33 remain today. And the other 10 we call the Lost Cocktails. And we're drinking 2 of them today. Dr. Fong is on there somewhere. And again, thanks to Swanky, he's done a lot of research, and you can read his book for a lot of more interesting stories about the early days. This is a great photo on the left of Mariano in his back bar with Bob Van Dorp on the left. And Bob also came from Chicago, and Bob's a key figure for many reasons. He became the first general manager of the Mai-Kai. He knew the ins and outs of running Don's, so he was able to apply all those same things to the Mai-Kai when they opened. If you look closely, Mariano's pointing at Dagger rum there on the shelf. And this is the back bar at the time, and it's still the same today. If you go back there and look, there's the drink mixing machines that were. Nobody's back there with shakers. They don't shake anything. They use the old-fashioned drink mixers. So before we get to that, I just want to drum roll for this. This is the big reveal I made yesterday in the class. Thanks to Swanky again, Bob Van Dorp has a file full of documents relating to the Mai-Kai all these years later. And among the piles of documents, Tim was able to dig up what appeared to be a vintage list of rums. So he passed it along to me, and I said, holy shnikes. This is the 1956-57 rum list of the Mai-Kai, every bottle accounted for that they had on their original menu. Total of 14,800 bottles of rum. Of course, we see Dagger at number 1. 3,449 bottles of Dagger, broken down by month. These are probably just inventory, so it's, purchases, shipments, whatever it may be. It's not necessarily what was consumed, but we can assume that most of this rum was consumed. Number 2 and number 3 are Spanish-style rums called Boca Chica, which nobody's probably heard of. I think it still exists in Puerto Rico. At the time, it was something necessary in a bar like the Mai-Kai. You need a workhorse Spanish-style mixing rum. When you're making so many drinks, you need those basic mixing rums, and that was Boca Chica. Demerara 86, Demerara 151, we're assuming that was Lemon Heart at the time. That's such a huge amount of rums there at the very top of the list. That's the bulk of the rums that were used. And if you look at the rum list today, it's probably very similar. They're following, because the cocktails haven't changed, the rums haven't changed. So we're still drinking drinks with the same flavor profile from 1956.
So say it's sort of interesting that I'm sort of studying this again and thinking about the book I've just finished, which you'll see at the end there. But what I did was, very briefly, was take 30 classic cocktails, 30 classic tiki cocktails from the era, and break them down by components, and basically do some very simple statistics to show which were the sort of key rums being used, what are sort of like those canonical tiki rums, and this list basically mirrors, at least the beginning of the list, basically mirrors what I found out, that Jamaican rum, the Dagger Jamaican rum, was the number 1, like dominant number 1 type style of rum, and then number 2 is what I call a lightly aged and filtered rum, what today we would call a white rum, so something like Bacardi or El Dorado 3, things like that. Next one being basically a classic gold, rum with a little bit of age to it, and number 4 and 5 being basically the sort of splitting out Demerara rums from the sort of the other moderately aged rums. So that kind of fascinating to see that I was sort of on the right track there.
If you go down the list, there's a whole lot of other stuff on there, not quite as popular as the top, but you see a great variety of rums. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of rums are on Don Beach's menu from 15 years earlier. Some Bacardis there, some names you may know, some Don Qs. these little check marks, I figured out this document was created for a purpose besides the inventory. Right down here, you can see a list of numbers, PR for Puerto Rico. They were tallying up all the Puerto Rican rums, and it came to a grand total of 5,908 bottles of Puerto Rican rum. And I think there's a good reason for that, as we'll see. That was their most dominant rum at the time.
Right, and this is very, very much in sort of line with that era. Basically, from the 30s, 40s, 50s, from those era on, was the real rise of Puerto Rico as a very large rum producer. You know, there was rum being made there before, but we sort of see the huge increase in production volumes around that era.
And I always assumed that there was a lot of Cuban rum here back in the early days. For whatever reason, you romanticize about it, but there really weren't that many. There's a few on here. There's some Bacardi Cuban rums. And I was able to figure that out because of I guess it's Bob Van Dorp's check marks. He didn't check this Bacardi because it's probably from Cuba. He checked this Bacardi, it's from Puerto Rico.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of misconception that when during the Cuban Revolution in '59 that Bacardi went elsewhere, but Bacardi had already established distilleries in Puerto Rico much earlier, and Mexico as well. And there was actually a time when there was a Bacardi distillery in Spain. So they had branched out. They took their initial success from like the 1900s, 1910s, and wisely branched out. Another interesting thing I see up here that sort of catches my eye is the Secrets, which is a Trinidad rum. And still you see some references to Secrets bouquet, and it sort of becomes sort of another holy grail for a lot of people.
They had 120 bottles here. I'm not sure what they used it for. You don't see a lot of Trinidadian rum here. I just assume it's just a popular rum to have.
Yeah. I don't know. Good question.
Again, Stephen said that was Trader Vic's personal favorite.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's sort of what triggered a sort of a modern day interest in finding some classic Secrets bouquet.
Back to the Bacardi, I have an old bottle of Cuban Bacardi here that we pulled from the back. One other thing I want to show real quick, the Special Reserve 15 at the very bottom here, that was on Don's menu, but if you remember, Don's menu had Special Reserve 17, and if that rings a bell with anybody, it's the same 17-year-old Ray and Nephew Special Reserve that was in Trader Vic's original Mai-Tai. That's sort of a holy grail of rums.
Right. The story is told is that after they drank all the Ray and Nephew 17, they switched to 15. So it makes sense being here. It sort of matches up with the timeline of that era.
Just some quick facts here. I broke down some numbers. Of course, like I said, the Puerto Ricans dominating, the Jamaicans, the Guyana rums, and the Virgin Island rums coming in a strong fourth. And as it breaks down by percentage, you have a lot of Spanish Caribbean rums in the cocktails. And that's, if you kind of break down the Mai-Kai cocktails, that's basically what it is. You got these base rums, and then you got the flavor from the Jamaican and the Demerara just spicing up the drinks. And then these were all the ones that were on Don's menu and that also made their way onto the Mai-Kai menu. We'll see those on the tour for you lucky folks who take the tour. So like I was saying, Mariano became a star bartender, probably one of the first. They called him the Houdini of the liquids. And there was some advertising done in the 1950s. There you see Mariano in a Puerto Rican rum advertisement. So my thought is that Puerto Rican rum was being tallied up and used to cement a relationship with rums of Puerto Rico, which lasted for decades. And there you see the famous Mai-Kai decanter that was produced for Don Q. If you walk outside and look at the three tikis just across the entryway, there's a tiki carved by Tom Fowner, a local carver, to look like that decanter.
As you say, it's I don't know if you were going to say this, but also sort of interesting El Dorado rum from Puerto Rico. It's just now we associate it with Guyana.
Right. Yeah, and they have a bottle in the back. I don't want to belabor that point, but here he is in the 1960s, Mariano, in the Derby Daiquiri, which became his signature cocktail, and it was created for the Florida Derby, and again in association with rums of Puerto Rico. And he got a lot of press out of this, and you'll see a lot of coverage of his work on the Derby Daiquiri in both Tim's book and in Beach Bum Berry Sip and Safari. 1970s, Mariano's still doing his thing. In the twilight of his career, he was here until 1979, and these photos are probably from the mid to late 70s. There you see him with a lot of the cocktails of that era, which look very similar to the cocktails today. So when Mariano retired in 1979, we've sort of frozen everything in time. The owners of the Mai-Kai took his secret recipes, put them in a safe, and said, that's it, we're sticking to these, nobody's going to change anything. They didn't change anything in the back bar either. This is a peek inside the very back of the Mai-Kai. Behind the kitchen is where the bar is. A lot of people come here and say, oh, where are the bottles? Where's the bar? Let's go, watch the bartender make our drink. That doesn't happen here. You go into Molokai, there's no bar. So what they do is they have a bar behind the scenes. Of course, you've probably seen it in the Molokai. But in this part of the building, the bar is way back there. It's behind the kitchen. When there was a bar in the back of this room, originally it was called the Surfboard Bar. I think we'll see a picture of that coming up soon. Same bar, created by Mariano, all these procedures and techniques that were created and invented by Don Beach. At the Mai-Kai, drinks are made in the back. You see the bartenders in the back. They come out these windows. The servers do the garnish and expedite the drinks as quickly as possible to the dining room. On a busy night, there could be, how many, Kern? 400 people dining? Hukilau? Maybe? We could have more than 400 people ordering drinks at once, so you really got to be fast. So this system really gets those drinks out there and moving. And the even and odd means you're at an even number table or an odd number table. Now the back bar is known for many things, and one of the things that I love about it is this vintage rum collection. That's sort of why we're here to talk about the rums. I first was kind of turned on to this rum collection by Beach Bum Berry. Nobody really kind of knew about it. It was like this secret, I hear there's a bunch of cool rums back there. I don't know. Have you been back there? No, I haven't been back. Jeff got a little tour in 2009. Actually, it was a big tour. He did a lot of tasting of rums. He wrote about it on his blog, and I just love this quote. It's an epic Beach Bum Berry. High up near the ceiling, on a shelf running the length of one wall, perched Mariano's prized collection. Literally his top shelf rums, some legendary, some obscure, all at least 40 years old. The shelf looks a necropolis of bottles, which stood sentinel like mummies in an Egyptian antiquities gallery. We the living paid our respects in hushed silence.
I wish I was good with the imagery as Jeff is on this one.
Yes. We all aspire. So this picture was taken right around that same time I got my first tour, but unfortunately I didn't go back there with Jeff, but it was it piqued my interest and a lot of people's interest to see what was actually back there. Luckily enough, I'm a local, so I kind of hang out here, and I got a chance to go back there several times. This was a most recent photo I have, taken a few weeks ago. Same back bar, same rums. So those 40-year-old rums are now 50-year-old rums, and they're still sitting up there. Mariano would just stash the rums up there. He thought, I don't know what he was thinking, but luckily for us, he had among other things, foresight to create a living history museum of rum.
Yeah. I mean, just thinking of my own collection, I can imagine this was his reference library. If he was going to do something new, like oh, I want something that was like that rum, and reach out, grab it, try it.
Or perhaps if a rum goes off the market and he can't get it anymore, he wants to know what it used to taste like so he can figure out what new rum to use, right?
Right, exactly.
And of course, with the popularity of the rum collection, we started to have VIPs come through. And on the left there, that's Alexander Gabriel from Plantation Rum. I don't know if any of you guys were here last year on the Sunday. He spoke on the stage. And after his presentation, he was given a tour of the back bar, and I was lucky enough to tag along and take that photo. He went straight to those Barbados rums that Matt was talking about. He's holding the Lightborn there and the Cockade.
I don't say it's not entirely coincidental that he grabbed them. I mean, obviously he now has the Barbados Association now, owning West Indies Rum Distillery. But what many people don't know is during that era, Mount Gay was essentially the only other functioning Barbados rum distillery. that from basically the 1900s through like the advent of rise of Foursquare in 1990s, the vast majority of Barbados rum was actually made at West Distillery, which Alexander now owns.
And then this fall, I had the pleasure of meeting for the first time Joyce Spence, the master blender of Appleton Rum, and she came back to, of course, pay her respects and was given a tour. And there you see her holding a couple of the Dagger rums, probably including this bottle right here. And of course, we made sure to say, you know, Joy, can we get some of that again?
It would be nice. I mean, the interesting thing I like to think is people are a little obsessed with this. Sort of like trying to recreate the Ray and Nephew 17 rum, but there's an awful lot we don't know about it. In particular, like we know it would have been pot stilled, but we don't know what that rum was aged in. It was laid down and would have been laid down when Vic did the Mai-Kai in 1945. That rum would have had to have been laid down in 1925, and we hadn't yet seen the rise of ex-bourbon cask like we see now. So, you know, it might have been wine cask. Like, we really don't know. It would require a lot of skill to successfully, replicate that rum.
What was cool about watching Joy look at all the old rums is, as the master blender, she knows, the ins and outs of the bottling process. She was picking up bottles and looking inside, seeing secret codes. Oh, that's from 1973. Oh, that's from 1978. And then she picked up a few of these old ones. She had no idea because they didn't. Back in those days, they didn't label the bottles.
Yeah, not so much.
Now this is another photo from my most recent tour. This is what you see when you walk back behind the Mai-Kai kitchen. It just looks like, oh, another room. We call it the inner sanctum. There you see the rums up there on the shelf. Behind a heavily guarded locked door, by the way, so don't get any thoughts. So we're going to give you a little tour of some of the cool rums back there on the shelf. I took these a couple weeks ago. This is starting from left to right on the top, some old White Heart, which is sort of related to Lemon Heart.
And I'm going to say really quick, this is, I discovered this is a very important brand. As best as I can tell, this was the very first rum that I found in my research that was actually sold as a brand, not like, as essentially we saw in 1879 or so, we saw White Heart rum being advertised, and it sort of predates some of the other rise of other brand, rums as brands by about 40 or 50 years.
Chateau is one of those rums from the Virgin Islands that was on the original 56 menu. Some of these others, it's sort of a hodgepodge. There's no kind of organization. It says American here, but ignore that. Well, there's one here, Old Florida rum. I'm not sure when that's from. Yeah. Moving right along, we see the Mount Gay, as you mentioned. There's a couple old bottles of Mount Gay. Interesting, this says sugarcane brandy.
Yeah, it is in fact a rum. I was actually chatting with Frank Ward, who was the master distiller, basically ran Mount Gay for a number of years, and he said that the sugarcane brandy was basically like a higher quality rum. It had more pot still in it. It wasn't entirely pot still, from what I recall, but it was sort of like their top shelf rum, one of their top shelf rums.
I have a sugarcane rum they released within the past decade that's pretty much similar to that, I would say, right? Maybe?
I don't know. I have to look. I'd have to go back to my notes on that one.
Lord Nelson, very old Jamaican rum. And next to that, we see the special reserve from Ray and Nephew. This is the 12-year-old that was on that menu. The 15 was on the menu. This is a 12-year-old that came after the 15, right?
Right.
And a Brugal, that's a little more recent. But that's a...
And interesting to notice, Brugal, I believe it's saying product of the Virgin Islands.
Correct, yes.
Predating Brugal, now we know Brugal as Dominican Republic. There was actually some interesting conversation about this on one of the Facebook forums, and as best we can tell, Brugal may have gone the same route as Bacardi and basically had distilleries in multiple places.
And we'll see that with several rums in the back, that there are multiple countries that the same rum comes from that you might think, oh, they've always been from
right.
a certain place.
Right.
There's an old Myers. This is an unopened bottle. Even though it looks like, oh, somebody drank out of that, we checked it the other night. This is a sealed bottle, and it's probably going to taste exactly like it did in the 1950s or 60s. The loss of a little bit of liquid is not unusual for an old bottle, correct?
Correct. Yes, absolutely. There's a famous, or semi-famous rum collector in Boston named Eric Witz, who has a Facebook following. He collects these very old rums and other spirits, and he always talks about spill level, and this seems very much in line with unopened bottles.
And then next to that is the, moving down to the right, that special reserve. That is the 15. This is the 15, and this has been opened and heavily consumed.
Right.
I believe I'm going to blame Beach Bum Barry for that on his tour.
So, interestingly, there's a little backstory on this one. If it is in fact the same bottle as the one I'm thinking of, I actually had some of this in France a couple years ago. I was at the plantation Saint Ferrand. They actually had a bottle of this that had been gifted to them by Steve Remsburg, and I was able to taste this. And they won't officially tell you as such, but this is the rum that they tried to replicate, and I think did a pretty good job with their collector, their first edition collector series, which just became available a month or so ago. It's a pretty expensive bottle, but this was the bottle that Alexander was trying to replicate the flavor of, and from I tasted them about a year apart, but my recollection is they were pretty similar. He did a good job in that regard.
I'm going to move a little faster because we want to squeeze a lot of stuff into this presentation. In this slide, you see a lot of old rum Barbancourt. Same rum Barbancourt we know today. These are very early versions of that, of course. Some Lightborn that was mentioned earlier from Barbados. There's an old Cruzian rum there. Cruzian's a very old brand. There's the cockade that actually Alexander pulled that down off the shelf, and we tasted a little. Kern, remember that? Very, very awesome rum. One of the best rums I've ever tasted. I had the pleasure of getting a little sip of that. Some Ron Rico, which is a brand you may know as a cheap bottom shelf rum. But back in these days, Ron Rico was really a very, very good rum. There's the Siegerts, Don Q 151, which is one of the rare instances of one of these old rums that's still used today. They use the Don Q 151 in the flaming cocktails and the flaming desserts. Here we see more Don Q, a throwback to that Rums of Puerto Rico relationship. Old St. Croix, Boca Chica, that's that workhorse mixing rum from the original menu. We're seeing a lot of Jamaican names here. Royal Caruba, which is a predecessor of today's Caruba. That's probably a Caruba from the 70s and maybe 60s next to it.
What, this one or the other one?
The one hiding in the back is more recent, but it's still not
it's
not a current Caruba.
No. My guess is this might be the 40s or so. By the way, the Caruba name, actually, it was a Swiss company, and it stands for basically Rum Company Basel. There's actually a meaning to Caruba.
Now we're starting to see some Bacardis from Cuba here. There's one. Getting now toward the end of the shelf, there's some really cool stuff here. This is the Sloppy Joe's rum, aged 40 years. And when Jeff wrote about this, he placed the era of this rum to sometime in the early 1950s. So this is a rum that was probably just picked up in Cuba. The Thornton brothers were famous for taking trips to Cuba on the weekends, and they were probably at Sloppy Joe's bar, and maybe Sloppy Joe himself just handed them a bottle and they brought it back. A lot of Jamaican rums down here at the end. These are very old brands. Kelly's Rum. What's that one? Royal
Reserve.
Royal Reserve. And as far as I can tell, this is an old Martinique rum of some sort.
Yeah. I think that would be Bali.
Right.
I think that's rum Bali. Also, the Royal Reserve. If you look at the bottom, Edwin Charley. He was one of the Jamaican merchants from the early 1900s who was known for, or basically buying rum from multiple distilleries and aging it himself. And so Edwin Charlie's was a brand basically at that point in time.
It still does exist in Jamaica. I've seen bottles. I've heard of bottles.
I mean, so I know the Campari or Appleton has basically done sort of like special edition Edwin Charlie things. I don't know if it's still on the shelf,
Right.
Regularly available on the shelf.
Exactly. Now we're right at the end of the shelf on the top. There's some very old lemon heart rums. I think I have one over here. There's an old lemon heart bottle. Quite a bit left in this. And some ancient Bacardi rums, all from Cuba. So I just want to move quickly as we wrap up to talk a little bit about what else is going on with the lost rums. We also have some lost cocktails, like I mentioned. And we've had these parties before where we bring back some old cocktails from the past. We did it at Hukilau 3 times before. So today is just a continuance of those traditions. These are all the lost cocktails that have disappeared from the menu over the years, and we've been lucky to be able to taste them again. Today we're drinking the Demerara Float, featuring Lemon Heart 1804, which is actually special today because the regular Demerara rum on the Mai-Kai menu is Hamilton 86. They do use the 151, but they use Hamilton 86, which again fits that 86 proof original profile of the original menu. And the very odd Dr. Fong, which was Don Beach's Dr. Funk, and has a very odd story. If you ever do some cocktail research, I have a story on the blog about it. Very anise heavy. It has a white Bacardi rum in this. Of course, my website, I want to give a plug. You can go and find out all about all the history of all the cocktails, where they came from, their Don the Beachcomber ancestor, my little ratings guide that I've rated all the drinks. I have a bunch of papers down here. You can come pick them up and take them with you if you want, if you don't want to check the website. There's the menu today, as it has evolved into a spectacular menu. The rums today are a little bit different. Same style, though, as we mentioned. They're no longer using these old lemon hearts on the left. They're using the lemon hearts on the right. Same thing here. We've got the rum styles. We got the Demerara rums, the Jamaican rums, and the Spanish-style rums that make up the bulk of the cocktails at the Mai-Kai. So if you're drinking an SOS, you want to know what's in it. It's got that Demerara and the Spanish Gold rum. Looking at the back bar, right below those top shelf rums, you got all the regular rums that they use every day. There you see the Hamilton, the Don Q. They still use the Brugal as their aged Spanish rum, the Bacardis. There's some more of the current rums on the mixing shelf. Castillo Gold is sort of like their basic gold mixing rum. It's from Bacardi. It's just rebranded for mass consumption. And of course, there was a question earlier about the dark Jamaican. So here we go. The Kahala Bay for 20 years was the dark Jamaican rum here, and it was very close to Dagger. It wasn't really the same thing. We can't get that old flavor that we want, but Kahala Bay came pretty damn close, and it was something I kind of did a lot of research on. And what I've learned is Dagger Punch was replaced by Appleton Punch at some point in the 80s. Dagger came back, but at a lower proof. So that's when we started to see a little bit of change. It was no longer 97. Kahala Bay replaced the second version of Dagger, and from what I've been told, it was sort of the same kind of blend. Appleton just said, "Oh, let's get rid of Dagger, call it Kahala Bay, and send it to the Mai-Kai." I think the Mai-Kai was the major consumer of Dagger in the entire country, correct? Nobody else was using it. I found it at a few local stores, and I posted it on my blog, and it kind of went viral, and people were trying to find Dagger everywhere. Kahala Bay, I'm sorry. So the big news, I revealed this yesterday. 2017, Kahala Bay went off the market, sadly, and we couldn't find it anywhere. We don't know why. Appleton really won't tell us. Ray and Nephew just stopped producing it. So the Mai-Kai started using Appleton Signature, which is very fine rum, but it's not that funky, dark Jamaican style. It's going to give you a different flavor in the cocktails. So after a couple of years, the Mai-Kai got tired of that and said, let's do our own rum. So very recently, the Mai-Kai began mixing with a new multi-rum blend that closely duplicates the flavor of Hukilau Bay. I can't tell you what's in it. It's their own blend of rums, but if you drink one of those cocktails, like the rum barrel or the yeoman's grog, there's a whole list of them. I have those lists down here as well if you want to pick them up. You can taste that same funky Jamaican flavor. There's also a little bit of sipping rums back there on the top shelf. The Mai-Kai has a very nice sipping rum menu. So I think everyone should go out there and get their jet pilots and their zombies, and we're going to do a tour. It's going to last about 15 minutes. We're also going to invite anyone who wants to do a tour with Tim. Swanky's right here. He's going to meet people up front, by the front, about 3 o'clock. So do a tour of the front of house. Tim's going to give up to 30 people, I believe, who first come, first serve. I'm sure he can accommodate everybody to do an expert tour of the dining rooms and all the interior of the Mai-Kai. So thanks, Tim, for doing that. What's that? Oh, Tim's first drink is the Flaming Coffee Grog, by the way. Yeah, you get the show, and it's, of course, a Don Beach original. Sometimes I end my night with that, too. That's a good starter or ender. So you guys enjoy yourselves, and our class members, thanks for coming. You guys on the tour, we'll meet you right down here in a minute. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And there you have it, folks. Rums of the Mai-Kai with Jim Hayward and Matt Pietrek. I'd like to thank Jim Hayward for graciously allowing me to not only record this symposium, but also for including me in Kern's VIP Insiders Tour of the back bar, kitchen, and offices of the world-famous Mai-Kai. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time inside the Desert Oasis Room.